Not everybody is an interior design aficionado. And you know what? That's okay. Today, we're here to talk about what you can do to make smaller spaces not only look bigger, but also just look more welcome and inviting to those who would be touring your rental. Over the next 10 to 15 minutes, we'll discover how to take a nice space and turn it into a wow space. Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us for another value-packed TenantCloud podcast. If you want to be a more informed, better educated, and successful landlord, then stay tuned. With over a decade of property management experience, we bring you short and sweet, bite-sized pieces of incredibly valuable property management tidbits in 15 minutes or less. In today's podcast, like we said, we're going to be talking about how to take a nice space or an okay space, or maybe it's just a space that feels small. And we're going to turn it into a place that is inviting, it's welcoming, it's warm, it's also modern, and just some tips and tricks that you can do in your space to make it more appealing to the people who will be touring when you are trying to get your rental occupied and start generating that rental revenue that's so essential to your property management business. So getting started and jumping right in, the first thing we're going to talk about is, I know it sounds funny, but it's mirrors. Now, this is especially applicable if you have a small space and it doesn't feel very open and maybe narrow, maybe dark. Mirrors can really enlarge the space, and by placing them in strategic spots throughout the apartment, you can really make it feel much bigger than it actually is. And so you can read some blogs and things like that on how to place the mirrors and strategic places to put them, what type of mirrors, what size of mirrors, and when it's too much or when it's too little, and so on and so forth. But mirrors also help with lighting. They help with space and how someone visualizes it, and if they see it as being a really tight space or not. It just gives it a feeling like it's a lot bigger than what it actually is. So this is actually a really good idea for smaller spaces. Along with that is the lighting, and lighting does matter. It's a very effective way to take a tiny room and make it a warm and inviting space. And if you can't do it with natural light, which natural light is almost always the preferred way to do this, but if the windows are small or the windows are not placed properly to allow maximum light into the rental during the day, during touring hours, then you are going to want to get a few strategic lamps and try out different light bulbs for your space. Now, daylight bulbs have become kind of an in thing lately, and they do put off a nice light, but not one thing that you can't get into is what a lot of shows and things do is they talk about generic recommendations for every space, and you just can't do that when it comes to a rental, because every rental is going to be a little bit different. Everybody's paint, everybody's walls, their space, the design, the layout, the angles, everything is always going to be a little bit different. So you really want to test out the light bulbs that work the best for your space. Now, whether that is a daylight bulb or whether it's a warm light bulb or a yellow or whatever it is, a soft white, you just want to try out those different light bulbs in your different shades. Now, what I typically recommend is that you, at least in my experience, is that you use the same bulb once you do settle on it. Because if you have different shades or different colors and warmths and levels of light throughout the apartment, then or the rental, it can kind of seem off. So I generally do, once I do pick a light bulb for the place that I've staged, I usually stick with that same light bulb all the way through the rental. So just keep that in mind. Again, it comes down to your space, but definitely play around with lighting. LED lights are also a great way to introduce light into a rental that would be otherwise dark. They're also energy efficient, and so they're really a great option for a model unit that is going to have the lights on for pretty much every day, all day especially. The other thing that you'll want to do in your model space or vacant unit is provide some type of hidden storage, small pieces of furniture, that type of thing for those smaller spaces that are a lot of people might walk into and be like, wow, this feels like a tiny house. I didn't ever intend on living in a tiny house. This is a great way to show how your space can be utilized by introducing things that allow more space to be used with the limited square footage that you have. And so, whether that is a bed frame with drawers underneath of it, or even something like a Murphy bed, or other types of creative storage like fold out desks, or different pieces of furniture that convert. Like, there's a really cool table that I recently saw at IKEA where it actually raises and lowers depending on what you need to use it for. So if you want to use it for like a coffee table, you can lower it down with this little crank wheel. And if you want to use it as like an island in your kitchen, you can crank it up and it goes up to traditional countertop height. And so it's a really cool multifunctionality piece of furniture. And so introducing those types of things into your rental can really give people a better visual of how to utilize the space. And they might not even realize that it is small because of those little pieces of creativity. And in my experience over the years of touring rentals with people, is that a lot of people struggle to see beyond the flaws that present themselves and that are just natural for them to pick up on. And so anytime you have the ability to minimize those things and kind of remove them from that initial introduction to the rental, the better. And I say that from multiple aspects, from even if a rental is beautiful and gorgeous, but the previous tenant just moved out, I've had people say, well, that's fine. I can see past the dirty floors and stuff like that. I don't mind seeing a place that somebody just moved out of. Almost every time, if we allowed somebody to go and tour a rental, we would bring them into the rental unit and show them a unit that somebody had just moved out of. And 9 times out of 10, they could not look past that. And so it's just one of those things that people think they can. They think that they can look past any initial flaws, but in my experience, it's very difficult for a lot of people to do that. And so just keep that in mind. And that's really what you're trying to do here with the smaller space, is to kind of remove that initial impression of, wow, this is a really tiny space. I don't know if I can do this, to, oh, wow, this feels much more spacious than it actually is. And so it's a very subtle shift, but it does make a big difference when it comes to touring somebody looking for a rental. The last key piece to staging a rental, especially a smaller rental, is minimalism is going to be key. And why? Because you want to make it feel like it's more spacious. And if you have it cluttered with all kinds of different things, then it's going to feel a lot tighter than it needs to be. And you're going to detract from the impression that you're actually trying to create, that there's actually more space here than what I originally thought. It's now going to be, oh, wow, yeah, you can't fit much in here. And so keep that in mind. You want to stick to a monochromatic color palette, and you want calm textures for the walls and the ceilings. You usually want brighter colors like whites. And in fact, if you just go with a bright, simple, natural white throughout, that's usually a pretty good idea. And maybe small, minimal objects like little touches of greenery here and there. That type of thing can really give that nice pop of color when you do have those whites and those simple colors throughout. And so it really makes anything that is colorful pop a lot more, especially in a smaller space. And so it really is key to maintain a minimalistic approach when it comes to the furniture and the painting and anything that you put inside of the rental. If it doesn't need to be there, then don't put it there. If it's not serving a specific purpose, then it has no purpose being there. And so you really want to make it feel like it is a very welcoming and warm space. So just to recap, the things that we talked about is you want to introduce mirrors into the rental and be strategic in how you use them. You want to test out the various lighting not only light bulbs, but also the fixtures in the rental space to make sure that they match the space that you are staging. And you also want to use pieces of furniture that are going to add to the space, not take away from it. And so you want to introduce pieces of furniture that have multiple purposes and not just a single purpose for the rental. And then the last thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that you are maintaining a minimalistic approach for staging your rentals, especially if it's a smaller or darker space. And that also includes, if it is a darker space, maybe you need to change up the painting and go with light, bright colors, and then use small pops of color throughout the rental. If you do these things, I think that you'll find that it'll have a big impact on small spaces, and hopefully it allows you to rent out your units a lot quicker and continue generating that revenue, and that your tenants will absolutely love the space and you'll love it too. And so, once again, we thank you for taking the time to listen to a TenantCloud podcast. We hope that these podcasts provide value and that they allow you to become a better property manager, better landlord. And we would love it if you would share this podcast with anybody you think who could benefit from it. And also, if you could rate us anywhere that you're hearing this podcast, whether it's on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, your ratings allow more people to discover this podcast. And so we would really appreciate it if you value this podcast, if you would go ahead and rate it for us. And also chime in and talk with us anywhere that you are able to communicate with us on TenantCloud, whether that's through our TenantCloud Facebook group for TenantCloud users, or whether that's on Twitter or Facebook in general, or on Instagram, or even on the blog that this podcast is based off of, which you can find under the title Small Rental Decorating Ideas. And you'll find that under tenantcloud.com/blog. And it was published on November 13th of 2019. And so if you would like to chat with us on there and maybe chime in some of the ways that you improve your rental spaces, whether they're big, small, or dark, or whatever, we would love to hear the things that you're doing with your rentals to improve the space. And we'll look forward to speaking with you next time.